So again, in this passage from the letter to the Galatians, this is St. Paul's radical use of the Old Testament, in particular, his use of the stories of the Old Testament. So again, as you go through the story, this is Abraham, and Sarah is the free woman, and Hagar is the slave woman, and so Abraham doubts his faith in the Lord. He kind of has a moment of doubt. He says, "Oh, God might not fulfill His word to me," and so actually Sarah also instigates. She says, "Well, why don't you have a child by Hagar, the slave woman?" And so Ishmael, Hagar's child, comes first. He's the firstborn. Then Isaac, who is the child that God promised to Abraham, comes second. And so, in a sense, what Paul is doing is he's saying, now my kinsmen of the flesh, the Jewish people, they came first, and the Gentiles have come next. But far from being illegitimate children, far from being, and so remember a couple nights ago we had the difference between, Abraham's seed and the seeds, and there's only one seed. Well, in a sense, the Jewish Christians who are arguing with Paul could say, you're right, there is one seed. It's us. It's the Jewish people, the ethnically Jewish people. We are the seed of Abraham. We are the ones who received the promise. And Paul says, no. The one who was the promised child was the second born, not the first. The first was as a result of doubting the promise of that Abraham responds to in faith. So everyone who has faith in Jesus Messiah is, in a sense, a child of the promise because they are trusting in God's promise to give them a future. That's what the child represents. Isaac represents a future for Abraham. And the future, in a sense, what Paul's saying is that the law is, in a sense, the ethnic particularities of the law address the flesh, literally in circumcision, but also in foods and the Sabbath. They address things of the flesh. And so that is, in a sense, a doubting of the promise, an attempt to make a future with our own hands by making ourselves special through what we do, as opposed to being elected, being chosen because of God's gracious love. God's bringing the impossible, or making that which is impossible possible, right? And that's the word that God speaks to Sarah. For God, nothing is impossible. So all those who are willing to believe the impossible thing, that God can raise up a people, right, for Himself through the gift of His Son Jesus, they're children of that promise. And so he basically turns that story on its head. And in a sense, what he's saying to the Gentile Christians is that you are actually the promised ones that God would bring into His kingdom. And this word for all of us is a word for, especially to those who have come to faith. In a sense, they feel like, well, I didn't get it at the beginning, or, I made some mistakes in my past. And so, it's I'm kind of less than because, I haven't done life just so from the very beginning. I've made those mistakes, and I'm kind of here by an allowance or by the tolerance of God. And the word from Galatians through Paul, I want you to hear that for Paul and the word of the Lord is that you are a child of promise. Even though you were born of late, even though you kind of came second in life, you're a child of the promise, that all who trust in Jesus' love for them are a child of the promise. So don't get caught up in, that not having done things just right the whole way through, or coming to the faith later in life, or even taking a faith that you maybe had as a child, but now owning it as an adult. And, you say, boy, I wish I'd done that earlier. Don't let that sort of stuff get in your head. Own your gifted chosenness as a child of God. and realize that that is something that is a gift to you from God's love and not something that we can go and get for ourselves. Because when we do that, we become slaves, slaves to our own pride, slaves to our own insecurities. Either way, we become slaves, as opposed to being children of gift. The reading from St. Paul's letter to the Galatians. Tell me, you who desire to be subject to the law, will you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and the other by a free woman. One, the child of the slave, was born according to the flesh. The other, the child of the free woman, was born through the promise. Now this is an allegory. These women are two covenants. One woman, in fact, is Hagar, from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the other woman corresponds to the Jerusalem above. She is free, and she is our mother. For it is written, Rejoice, you childless one, you who bear no children. Burst into song and shout, you who endure no birth pangs. For the children of the desolate woman are more numerous than the children of the one who is married. Now you, my friends, are children of the promise, like Isaac. But just as at that time the child who was born according to the flesh persecuted the child who was born according to the Spirit, so it is now. But what does the Scripture say? Drive out the slave and her child, for the child of the slave will not share the inheritance with the child of the free woman. So then, friends, we are children, not of the slave, but of the free woman. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.